Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to the webinar Sow, Grow, Eat, Simple Veg that Support Pollinators. It's a pleasure to welcome Wendy, who is a dedicated food growing advocate and the driving force behind Incredible Edible Barnet and Have a Grow. Over the past decade, she has led community food growing in activities in Barnet, starting with a community garden in New Barnet and going on to help to establish the Sustainable Food Network and Food Growing Leadership Program, supporting new generations of growers in Barnet. She has also organized seed swaps, training sessions, and community events, and is a strong voice for sustainability across the borough through her wider advocacy work. She's an active and keen volunteer with Barnet Friends of the Earth and is a trustee with Citizens Advice Barnet. There's no wonder then that Wendy has won the Environment category in Barnet Council's Inspirational Women and Girls Award. We're very grateful to Wendy for bringing this webinar together today. She has a lot to cover, so we will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. We will also ask you to be very kind and mute your microphones. We will also send links to Wendy's activities alongside the recording of the webinar in about 2 days or so. So thank you so much, Wendy. I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much and good to see everybody. I know some people on the call, but not others. So it's nice to see a mixture of faces, although I am now going to go back to my slides and not look at your faces so I can focus on what I want to talk about. So if I miss anything in the chat or if I miss anything, let me know, Sherry.
Okay.
So can I go to the next slide? Yeah, okay. So this is young Wendy on the slide when she moved to Barnet in 2009, and I got a garden. I thought, what am I going to do with that? So gradually, over the 9 years that I lived in that property, I grew vegetables. I took out the non-edibles, put in edibles, and grew a lot of food and got a couple of chickens. And I very quickly ran out of room. And I also realised some things go wrong. So when you start growing some things work and some things don't work. So I didn't really understand why things were working and why they weren't. So I went on some courses in horticulture and permaculture, and I did lots of volunteering, but there wasn't really anything in Barnet at the time. So when I eventually thought, I've run out of room in this back garden, what shall I do? I decided to try and start a community garden. And in 2016, I started in the Prince of Wales car park in East Barnet Village. And then in 2017, I met the minister of St John's United Reformed Church on Mowbray Road in New Barnet, and that's where I've been growing ever since. And that's what it looked like when we started in 2017. And this is what it looked like last year. So we go around, we're kind of going in a C shape around the side of the church. There's about 10 of us, I'd say, who look after this space. Some are from the church and some are not. But we started off at the front, we've worked our way around the side, and now we're starting to creep around the back a little bit as well. My personal main reason for growing food is to help the environment. As the quote here from the Soil Association says, our food and farming system can help resolve the climate, nature and health crisis, but only if we work with nature and not against it. But as I'm sure you all know, which is why you're here this evening, that isn't always the case. And there is a bit of a problem with the link between food and climate, which I'll come on to a little bit more in a moment. But by having a range of community gardens around the borough, I don't know if it's my next slide, or no, I'll come on to that in a moment. But we do have a range of community gardens around the borough, and we're trying to show people what food looks like, what seasonal food tastes like, and it's all helping to chip away at information about how food impacts the environment. So at Incredible Edible Barnet in St John's URC in Mowbray Road, we grow food. This is one of our wonderful peaches from last year. It was amazing. We have squashes and rosemary, and that's some mange too. We probably 100 different types of food we've grown over the 9 years that we've been there. But we also share the space with nature. We're very mindful about it not just being our garden, it's a garden that we share with a wide range of insects. We have ponds, we have many flowers, often edible, but not always. We've got various bug hotels. We have a dead hedge. We have earwig hotels. We have a hoverfly lagoons. We have bird wool that we hang for birds. So we're trying to do as much as we can to try and encourage a wide range of biodiversity into our space. And as I said, we're not the only community food garden in the borough. This is a new map that I've made to show where the range of gardens are. So if you come from anywhere across Barnet, there should be a community food space near you. I know that there are some people on the call who are running those spaces. And I also saw someone who's from our neighbouring borough of Enfield who's also running a community garden. So if you are not from Barnet, if you're from outside Barnet, there could also be another community garden near you. This map is just the gardens in Barnet, but if you look at the Capital Growth website, there is a map of gardens around the whole of London. So what are the problems, or like why are we here tonight? Why do we want to know about why we should be growing food and helping pollinators at the same time? Because there's this link, there's this connection between where our food comes from and the pollinators that we need to fertilize the food, to make our crops, and then the damage that we're doing to the land to kill off the biodiversity. So we are ended up in this cycle where pollinators are essential to 35% of global crop productions. That's 35% of the total amount of food that's grown in the world. And that is 75% of the different plants. So 25% of plants do not need pollinators, but some of them are where we're growing a lot of. So I'll give you a sneaky peek that wheat is one of the ones that does not need a pollinator because it's pollinated by wind. So that's why the 35% is lower than the 75% because we grow a lot of wheat and some of our other staple crops. And it's a range of reasons that pollinators are being impacted due to habitat loss of intensive farming. So as whole chunks of land are knocked down to grow one field of wheat is one example, but also in the Amazon, we're obviously chopping down trees to grow soya. So there's a range of ways that that's happening around the world. And we can all help to do something about that by changing our diets and changing the way that we buy and eat food. The liberal use of pesticides and fertilizers has also had effect on pollinators. So there are many common pesticides in particular, like Roundup and glyphosate, that are known to damage pollinators so that they can't breed and there are just less of them. Fertilizers also do the same. So as our farmers around the world, and this is because we are asking them to, there's no blame on farmers here. Farmers are doing what they think they need to do to grow food for the population of the world. But there is also a lot of waste. So if we reduce the waste, we reduce the pesticides, we reduce the fertilizers, we reduce the monocropping, and we built in more mixed crop growing areas, it can help to build back that pollinator decline. And that's what we're all doing in a small way in our own gardens and in our own community gardens. So you can see how it is possible to improve this cycle by having a varied habitat in your growing space. And then we need to try and encourage farmers to be able to do the same in their much bigger scale. And so we're going to try and I'm going to try and do a little quiz with you now. Let's see if this works. I might just try and bring up the chat so I can see what's happening. If Shuri has just posted, so Shuri's just posted into the chat the 3 emojis that I want you to try and post. So I've got 3 different crops for you, and you need to decide whether you think it needs pollinators for it to exist. So pollinators are essential, or if pollinators are helpful, or if it's safe, like that example of wheat that I gave, that we don't need pollinators. So if you think it's essential, copy the B emoji into the chat. If you think pollinators are helpful, copy the flower. And if you think we're okay without them, pop the wheat So let's see if this works. The first one is potatoes. Are pollinators essential, helpful, or are we safe? If you can't pop into the chat, so oh yeah, oh safe. That's it, great. Pop the word if the emojis don't work. Um, we've got a mixture. Essential, safe, helpful, helpful. Okay, the answer is actually safe. We are okay for potatoes because they're a root crop. They do obviously have a flower. Yes, it's tricky to do emojis on the phone. Sorry, V, but typing the word is fine. I think we get the idea. But actually, we had a real range there. Um, I'll have a look back at this afterwards. Yeah, I think we've roughly got a third. We will be okay for potatoes because we can use the seed potato to grow another. The flowers and the seeds that are created are not essential um, for growing potatoes. Um, the flower potatoes probably are useful for pollinators, um, but they do diminish the yield of the potato. So it's that balance. If you're growing potatoes, I usually let a few go to flower if they come. I'm not too worried. But general practice, if you want to get the tuber to remove the flowers. Okay, let's try the next one. If this works. Chocolates. Thought it'd be better to have a picture of chocolate rather than cocoa beans, but this question is about cocoa beans. Are these essential, helpful, or are we safe? Okay, and we've still got a mixture, but more essentials coming through, I think. And that is the right answer, essential. So if we end up in a future where we have no pollinators, and we don't stop the decline, we will have no chocolate. Now, obviously, there are bigger problems that the world will be facing if we're in that situation, but it just draws to mind the big changes that could come. I think coffee is another one. So any coffee drinkers out there, you will also be struggling. And the final one is strawberries. Essential, helpful, or are we safe? Good mixture, good mixture. I think if I looked back at all of the answers afterwards, you probably more people are saying essential overall. And I think that's indicative of the people on the call that you're all pollinator protectors and you want to look after them and you're here to try and learn how to do more. But the strawberry is helpful. We can actually have strawberry fertilization without pollinators, but we get a better yield with. So if I can work my way onto my next slide, yeah, this is a report that somebody wrote, the information about who is on the next slide, because I broke this into two bits. This shows you in more detail so the top field is no dependency, and that includes the wheat and the potatoes. And we've got little dependency. And then if I go on to the next slide, modest dependency. So the example there is strawberry, yield reduction of 10 to 40% without pollinators. So we could double, or we could have half of the amount of strawberries. So I think overall this report, and it's by a data scientist called Hannah Ritchie, if anybody knows her, and that's the link that Sherry's popped into the chat. It's a really good website if you like data to kind of prove what's happening or show you or explain what's happening. I do really like Our World in Data and Hannah Ritchie's work in those areas, but this is just one example to give you backed up information about how food is affected. And I think that the result of Hannah's report was that if we did lose our pollinators, we would lose roughly, I think, overall 10% of our food. or with a reduced pollination. If we don't do something about it, we're going to 10% of our food. And, in a world with an increasing population, with more demands on land use and more changing diets, we don't need a reduction, we need an increase. Final piece of gloomy stuff before we head into the nice information is one other report that I just wanted to draw your attention to. And this is a report that the UK government put out in January this year. And it's not good. And I think when it came out in January, it was also hidden away at the bottom of the agenda. Yeah, Juliet, it's depressing and scary, that's true. But we need to have depressing and scary information to push our politicians to do more about things. And I think this one, it was a little bit hidden away, and we could all send a link to our MPs to ask them what they think about it. I did send it to my MP, Dan Tomlinson, and I'm not entirely sure I had a reply, but he did. I've met with one of his researchers about it, and we're kind of having a conversation. But when you're campaigning with politicians, it can often be a slow burner. But please do contact yours about this report. And this is my most wordy slide, so I'm not going to read it all out. I just wanted to highlight a couple of the points that were made that even though we're looking at it's purely about biodiversity loss, there are several mentions in there about food production and food security. So they're really closely linked. That third point says that critical ecosystems that support major global food production areas and impact global climate, water and weather cycles are the most important for UK national security. All countries are exposed to the risk of ecosystem collapse within and beyond their borders, and particularly with food security. And without significant increase in UK food systems and supply chain resilience, it's unlikely the UK would be able to maintain its food security if ecosystem collapse drives geopolitical competition for food. And it's going to happen. It's just been happening in the last few months because of one piece of water that's closed by one situation. And so as more of those things happen, as we get all a bit more interested in this subject, or as food starts to be more affected, things could get worse. But we're now in a point where we can do something about it. So it is negative, but we can turn it into a positive by trying to grow some of our own food and just becoming more aware. Just by you being here, you're becoming more aware about where your food's coming from and what you can do about it. So I've got 3 different groups of plants that I'm going to talk about. Just check how I'm doing for time. Too bad. And obviously, the first one for me, anyone who knows me, is the legume or the bean. And this was in the group where they're mostly fine without pollinators. So by you growing these plants in your garden, we don't need them for the food, but you're helping feed the bees or other pollinators. I might tend to use bees as a shortcut, as people do for pollinators in general, but leguminous plants can attract a wide range of different pollinators. So by growing these in your garden, you'll be feeding those insects and bringing them to your space. I think I've just got a note here to myself that broad beans and runner beans are especially good for bees. Now we're slightly past the broad bean sowing season, so I've not focused on it particularly today, but it is meant to be a good one. Mainly because it's overwintering and or grown early, so it's an early food source for bees. So next year or over autumn, you can sow your seeds in autumn and they overwinter. Try some broad beans as well. And runner beans we are going to look at in a moment. These are some slides that I've shared before, so I won't dwell into them too much, but these are the reasons that I think beans are brilliant and people need to know more about them. Beans are good for the heart. We all know this rhyme from when we were young. And the planet. They have such a huge range of benefits. So they're a low impact crop on the ground. They don't need a lot of feeding because they can create their own nitrogen. They also leave a little bit behind for the crop that follows. They don't have many pests, so they don't need much pesticides being applied, if any, if you're going to grow them organically. Um, they have economic benefits, being that they're cost effective. And as we need to feed more people, as I talked about, it can be a good way for people to create more foods more easily, more meals more easily. And they're healthy. So I'm not a nutritionist, but it's widely reported that they are full of protein, full of fiber, and full of a range of vitamins and minerals. So if you do eat meat, then you can use beans as a replacement for meat and try and move away from that quite environmentally damaging food source into something that's a bit more kinder to the planet. And the benefit is that you're also um, affecting your blood, getting a better blood pressure, less likely to have heart disease, strokes, diabetes, and more. I mean, it's just an all-round brilliant thing, isn't it? So how do we grow beans? I've not got all of this information on the slide because it could end up being quite wordy. So I've just got some notes at the side of me here that I might kind of flick my eyes to. This is, I think, is a range of just French beans that I growed a few years ago, but you can see that they come in a range of sizes and colours, and there are thousands of different types of legumes and beans that you can grow around the world for different soils, different climates, different sizes, different tastes, different colours. There really is a huge range. They they can grow in a range of sizes. So you might want to choose a dwarf variety if you're on a balcony or something like that. But some of the runner beans can get really tall, up to 5 meters. So you need to have nice, strong support when you're going to have the climbing variety. So we have dwarf varieties and climbing varieties. With that runner bean, when it does get to head height, it's a good idea to chop it off, or when it gets to kind of a couple of meters, you can chop off the top and then the sides would bush out. But if it just was left to grow in its original habitat, it would get to 4 to 5 meters, which is huge, isn't it? As I mentioned, they fix nitrogen. So it's a good idea to, if you grow lots of vegetables, if you start to grow more vegetables, then to include them in a rotation. So it's a good idea to rotate your plant families so that the land is given a bit of a break. So you might only do your beans in that space for 4 or 5 years and then you move it around. It's a good idea to do brassicas, so cabbages and kales and cauliflowers, things like that, purple sprouting broccoli, after your beans because they like nitrogen and the beans will have left a little bit of nitrogen in the ground for you. You don't need to feed the ground much before you grow beans because they mostly look after themselves, but they do need to be well watered when they're planted. Then you can pause the watering for a little bit while they focus on settling in and putting up their growth, and then water them more when they start flowering. So that period in between root development and flowering, which is probably about a month, 6 weeks, something like that, you don't need to worry so much about watering, so you can go off and look after your other plants. It's a good idea to, this is for all beans and for most food plants, to be honest, to succession plant. So what I tend to do, as you can see, is I grow them in modules like this. I germinate them in my house, and then when they're germinated, I take them outside and put them under cover so that they're protected from any frosts. And then I plant out a few at a time, so they can wait in the module until they're ready to be planted out. And I might plant out 10, and then a couple of weeks later, I might plant out 10 more. And they do eventually start to get a bit leggy and a bit tall in their containers, so I'll pop the rest out if I've got room. But also keeping some backups for those pesky slugs is also a good idea. So if you plant everything out all in one go and the slugs come to visit that night, you might need to be starting again. But they're relatively quick to grow. They only take 7 to 14 days to germinate. So if you did have a pest problem, and slugs can be a problem, then you do often have time to start again. If you, as I mentioned before, broad beans like to be grown in cooler weather. They prefer cooler weather, and peas are the same. So I have already in my garden sown my mange too. I've not yet sown my beans because it's still a little bit cold, so I'll wait a few more weeks to do that because they won't be planted out until May. Um, as well as slugs, we do have problems with mice, particularly with peas. Mice can come and dig up pea seeds. So again, having like an over sowing or over planting can be a good idea, so that if you lose some to some of these pests, then you've got backups. Birds can also be a problem. And if you do have a problem with pigeons, in particular in your garden, then covering with netting can be a good idea to protect from that. And there are a few more. Aside from that, really, legumes don't really have many pests. Rather than talk particularly about how to stop pests now, I'm going to do it on one slide later because it's a general concept for any food crop really. So rather than repeat myself, I'll just cover it a bit later. But for legumes, you do also get some particular moths and weevils. So people might have seen them inside. If you open up a bean pod, you might see some little caterpillars crawling around. They are the larvae of moths or beetles. So as long as there aren't too many, we like moths, we like beetles, we like some caterpillars. So it's okay to have some of this biodiversity living in our space with us. If it becomes where the balance tips a little bit too much, we can use things like netting and barriers to try and stop them. But having a little bit is shouldn't be seen as a problem, and it's okay to kind of help with it. We're providing a food source for some of those other animals in our spaces. Um, this is an example of an allotment I had a few years ago during the pandemic. So me and some of my volunteers from Incredible Edible Barnet, we grew food for our local food bank. And it's an example really of how having a strong structure for beans is necessary. So we did the two sisters here, if anyone's heard of the three sisters. Underneath we've got our squash plants growing, and then we've got wigwams or would you call that a wigwam or a teepee, like um, V-shaped upside down sticks, which is a very common way of growing beans. But a few weeks after this picture was taken, it all fell down. So the growth can get quite much. There can be a lot of it. So you really do need to make sure that your structures are well secured. And if anyone's been in a garden with me, I will have said to you, it's really difficult to get sticks into the ground. I think it's one of the most physically difficult parts of gardening. So try your hardest, even though it's difficult, try your hardest to get those sticks into the ground. And if you're just growing in your back garden, one little teepee or one little wigwam of 4 or 5 sticks is enough. And then you plant a couple of plants around each stick. And as long as they're like maybe 10, 15 centimeters into the ground and a couple of meters high, so you want some nice long bamboo sticks, then your beans will happily climb up them. Um, French beans, very commonly grown. And one of the benefits of them is that you can get 3 different harvests. So you can eat the pods when they're young and fresh, I forgot to mention earlier, didn't I? So I would be sowing my bean seeds soon. So sowing them in April is fine. And then you can do that into modules, or from May, you can actually start to put the seeds into the ground. I tend to do things in modules personally because it's easier to then plant out a slightly bigger plant rather than wait for the slug to come along and eat the first shoots coming out of the ground if you've direct sown. But you might be able to try a few options. And if you've not got the space to grow in modules, then it's just sometimes thinking about what's practical. Um, and you can keep on sowing these seeds until June. But when you get to June, July, you've probably eaten enough pods. Like if you have 10 or so plants in your garden around your wigwam, you do end up with quite a lot of beans. So if you get fed up of the beans, you can freeze them and blanch them and freeze them, or you can eat them as the middle, as a what do they call it? Is it flagellae, the kind of green, softer bean? Or you can leave them, as I've got on the right, you can leave them to be dried beans and they will store for years in an airtight container. And you can either cook and eat them or you can use those for your seeds for the following year. So they're a real good all-rounder. You get a nice long cropping season. And the more beans you pick, so in the earlier stages when you're getting your fresh podded beans, if you pick them, then more flowers will come. So you're helping more pollinators and then you'll get more beans too. These are runner beans and very similar to French beans. You sow them between April and June, and again, do them in modules from April or into the ground in May. They have a similar germination period of 7 to 14 days, so they're coming up relatively quickly. So if they've not come up for some reason, it could either be that you've got old seed or sometimes the seed can rot. And that will particularly happen if the soil or the compost is cold. So if you do them outside and the ground is cold, the seed could rot before it's managed to germinate. And these are a good one to grow, so really good for pollinators. I think they probably have more flowers, but they might not all set into pods, but that's fine. The bee still gets its dinner. And they can also grow in partial shade. So if you've not got a full sunny garden, if you're not growing on your south side, or maybe your east or west side, they can also do well because they do like a lot of moisture. So if they're in full sun, they can tend to dry out a little bit more. And doing them in a more shady area can often benefit that. The same applies to peas. Peas also can be done in a little bit more of a shady area because they also like it to be wet. And this has got a slightly longer range of growing periods because there's a wider range of varieties. So there's one variety called Meteor that you can sow, sorry, in the autumn, and you can either overwinter it or just keep it in your undercover space outside until it gets to a couple of inches high, and then you can plant it out earlier so that you get a slight head start on your season. And then they can keep growing right through until October. But it can take around 12 to 14 weeks before you harvest. So the French beans you might be eating a little bit more quickly because you tend to eat that pod and you're not waiting for the final bean because you can eat the pod first. But because if you're growing pea, then it can take a little bit longer. That is why I prefer to grow Monge 2. So there's some of the Monge 2 that I grew, I think that was last year. And there's a nice range of colours. Like with different coloured beans, when you cook them, they lose their colour, but it just looks quite nice in the garden having a range of different crops out there. Yeah, so I think that's everything to say. And I'm just gonna have a drink and then we'll go on to squash. Okay, so this is a range of food plants that we need pollinators to help us with. So we have the plants, we are growing food for ourselves, but we only do so with the help of pollinators. So they're all great ones to have in the garden because they are prolific with flowers and the flowers are so big, many bees can get in there at one time. So it's a kind of win-win. Oh, somebody's not on mute. We're able to check that, shimmy. Okay. And here is a very happy bee. Forget where I took this. It's a slightly grainy photo, but you can. I don't know if you've ever tried to grow this or if you've seen it, but you can hear the bee is so happy. You're kind of wandering down the street or you wander into the garden and you just hear this buzz, and it's this really happy bee that's just covered in pollen because they've got right inside and they're wiggling around all of the pollen. And then they will do your job of fertilization for you by going into the next bee, wiggling around and dropping off the pollen for the next plant. Let me just check my notes. So, as with beans, where we have a smaller variety, being the dwarf beans, and the larger variety, being the climbing beans, we can do the same with the squash family. So, most of them are trailing. So, your pumpkins and your cucumbers, these are all in the same family, and melons, these are all in the cucurbit family. They are all trailing. And as with the beans, they will either need they will take up a lot of room on the floor, or you can grow them vertically and give them some support. So I've got some pictures to show you that in a moment. But if you don't have the space to grow something quite so large, you can get some bush pumpkins. And obviously the courgette is the more common bush type summer squash. So courgettes are summer squashes that we eat unripe. And if anyone's heard of patty pans, they're another summer squash, and there are others. They look like kind of spaceships. I think I might have a picture of them in a moment. And then pumpkins are winter squashes. So summer squashes you will pick young and ripe, and as with the beans, if you keep picking them, more will come. So pick your courgette when it's young and it's firmer and it's more tasty, then more courgettes will grow. And you get to the point where you might be slightly sick of courgettes, so you can give them to your friends and your family, or leave them to grow into a marrow if you like to eat marrows. But an alternative is to have, there are some varieties of squash that grow as a bush, and so they're only having fruits, sort of, if I'm blurry, if I can see that, they're only having fruits that may be the size of a grapefruit, something like that, so they're not too big, but the plant can support 3 or 4 of them in a smaller space. So that might be good to think about if you don't have a big growing space to try something in. But there are lots of different, like with beans, there are lots of different shapes and varieties and sizes and colours and tastes and textures. One called spaghetti squash. On the inside, it kind of looks like it's all been shredded, so you can just scoop it out and use it as spaghetti by putting your tomato sauce on top or your pesto or something else and just warm it up and cook it and eat it, which is very nice. Um, and yeah, there's more than just the butternut, I think is the message. So if you fancy trying some squash plants this year, try and find some interesting varieties. And I'm going to come on to ways for you to find plants, or if you've got seeds, sow the seeds, but I'm going to come on to ways for you to find plants later on. Again, I've not sown any of my squash plants yet, although I have sown my melon. I try and grow some melons in my polytunnel at home, but they didn't germinate very well, so I might be lucky if I have one. It's not doing so well. It's about so big and it's just not really managing to get off. I think because it's just a bit cold. I only am able to keep things in my I think it's west facing spare bedroom is where I have my plants inside. But you use what space you have, don't you? And what works in your environment, and you work with what you've got. Melons do need to be grown indoors. So if you're lucky enough to have some kind of polytunnel or greenhouse, melons can be really fun to try. If you're just dealing with outside, you can do cucumbers. They can either be inside or out, or anything else will go outside. So your courgettes and your squashes all need to be outside. I did try courgette inside once, and it just needed so much water. It was really hard to stay on top of, and I think it just was too hot. So sowing seeds in May, kind of maybe end of April, early May, up until June, and they germinate really quickly, only take about a week. So if they don't work, you've got a chance to try again. And then planting out both the legumes and squash, they're frost tender, so we need to wait until after we think there's been a last frost. Now it's difficult to tell that exactly, but generally in London it's around the middle end of May. So that's why we wait to plant out any tender plants until the end of May, and that includes all the plants I've talked about so far. Um, you um, you need to space courgette about 60 centimeters apart, so they need quite a lot of room, quite a lot of space to grow in, and ideally you would space the winter squash and pumpkins a metre apart because they do get very big. And they need lots of space, they need lots of water, and they need lots of nutrition. So they do need a little bit more looking after. So if you've got your own compost bin at home, that's perfect. Add a couple of bucketfuls of that to the ground when you put your squash in, and give it a good drink every week. And your bees and you will be happy when you get lots of different fruits. And you'll be picking them within about 10 to 14 weeks, something like that, depending on the variety. So I think this is one of the things that not a lot of people realise with food is actually how long things can take to grow. So it's one of the ways that we've become disconnected from where our food comes from. We just expect to go into the supermarket and there to be strawberries there all year round and to be able to buy anything that we want whenever we want it. So I think growing it yourself and seeing how long it does take to get from seed to plate can be quite a grounding way of understanding what farmers are doing for us around the world. What's my next picture? So these are just some pictures of some different squash that I've grown. This is a courgette, so I think it got to maybe four times this size. They can get quite big. This one in the middle is a doody, and I just loved the way how the tendrils, you could see this tendril in the middle starting to curl and unfurl, and the flower shoots were coming, and it did get quite big. This was something we tried to grow at Incredible Edible Barnet, and I forget what year it was. I don't think we were inundated with fruit because it did need that feeding and watering that we might not have been able to have kept on top of in a community space, but it's always fun to try. And I think this third picture was a melon in my polytunnel at home, and it's to show you how the male and the female flowers are slightly different. So the top flower is the female. You can see that there's a slightly paler yellow ball at the top of the flower, and that's the fruit. And the flower underneath, I've removed the petals because I would have been doing some hand pollinating here. Maybe I'd found that my bees weren't getting into the polytunnel and things were not being fertilized and the flowers were just falling off. So I would have tried a bit of hand pollination, which is effectively doing the job of the bee. So I'm taking the flower, I've removed the male flower petals, and I'm just going to wiggle it around inside the female flower for the pollen to cross from one to the other. So you can see the male flower has just got a long stem at the bottom. There's no ball where the fruit will show. And oftentimes, if you're not getting fruits that are setting, it could be that you've got an imbalance of male and female, and you might just, particularly at the start of the season, have more male flowers, and the female flowers are yet to come. So that could be a reason why you've not had your fruits just yet. This is a pumpkin that we grew up the wall, Incredible Edible Barnet. So they do start off quite small and then they start to grow up the wall and they need some kind of support. So we ended up tying it to the wall with an old net curtain just to stop it falling off and pulling the plant off the wall of the church. This was a really big pumpkin that we grew, and I think it ended up being a kind of pale blue skin. So it was not its final. I think it was its final size, but it wasn't its final colour. And that's the way of telling when to harvest. So usually the colour of the winter squash will change. Summer squash, so the courgette and your patty pan. These little yellow circle things in the bottom right here are patty pan. And it might be a little pumpkin there on the white thing on the left. Have I got my left and right there? I'm not sure. Don't always do that. But you can see the different range of shapes and sizes and colours of things that you can grow. They're all summer squash on the right, and that's an unripe winter squash on the left. Okay, now we're into annual herbs. And these are really good for pollinators if you let them bolt. So I've got 4 different herbs I'm going to cover. This is basil. We're also going to look at dill, coriander, and parsley. And if you think about when you're eating those, you're generally just eating the leaf. So you'll read in a lot of books things like water them so that they don't bolt, can be prone to bolt. And actually, it's okay if they do bolt. So again, if you've got a couple of extras, that can be a good way of keeping some for leaves and some for pollinators. But this is a bolted basil that I grew in my back garden one year, and you can just see the little white flowers at the bottom. This is a mint family plant, so it grows in a similar way to mint, but all of these are edible. The flowers are edible, and the stems are edible. They're probably a bit chewy, but the leaves are obviously edible too. And when we grow mint, and there's just so many different types of basil, aren't there? My favourite one to grow is lemon basil. You don't get quite so much of a yield, so it's not as big, but it's kind of like fizzy lemon flavoured when you eat it. It's really, really nice. Plant's gonna get some water. Really nice flavoured plant to grow. But there's all types, aren't there? There's Greek, which are the very small ones, Thai. They kind of got like a variation on the leaf, purple, cinnamon. So there's just lots of different types of basil to play with. And I must admit, I am a pesto snob. So when you've made your own pesto, either from homegrown basil or from shop basil if you need to buy it, there really is no going back to jar pesto. It is one of the best things you could eat. We're sowing basil seeds from April till about June, and you can actually grow them quite well on a windowsill. So you could continue to sow the seeds later if you were wanting to grow them inside. They might not grow as quickly, but they can grow all year round quite comfortably on a windowsill, but just might be a little slower. And if you just want to eat the leaves, you can be picking them in 6 weeks, but leaving them to go longer will give you a bigger crop, bigger yield. If you pinch the top out, the plant reacts by doubling up and bushing out. So it's quite a good one to take off the top, the first bits that you want to eat, and then more leaves will start to come out the side. And then eventually they do this wonderful flowering. Talking about bolting, so all the different herbs that we're going to look at, they've all bolted. And to bolt just means that it's creating its flowers. It's decided, or it feels like it's the end of its life. The end of its life is coming, the end of its time's coming. It's either too hot, too cold. Its perfect to growing environment is not right anymore. So it's decided to move on to its next generation, and usually that means to have flowers and seeds that it will disperse, a plant will disperse and grow into its next generation. So when we talk about bolting, that's all that's happening. But there's lots of other vegetables that you can leave to bolt as well. So brassicas, leaving any brassica, so a kale or a cabbage or purple sprouting broccoli. So if you don't manage to eat everything, leaving it in your garden to often overwinter. And what if you wander around any allotment now or any community garden, you'll see lots of yellow flowers from brassica plants, and they are covered in bees. They're really good for bees at this time of year, and they're also edible, which is another bonus for us. But lots of things can be left to bolt. You can leave beetroot and chards, carrots and parsnips and onions. They are all biennial, which means they will grow the typical crop that we want to eat in year one. And then if we leave them in the ground and overwinter, they will bolt and flower in year two. So if you did grow any carrots, parsnips, beetroots, onions, if you just leave a couple in the ground, then next year you will get free flowers, often earlier than some of your other more natural flowers have occurred because they've overwintered and they've just got that good head start. So bolting can be good for pollinators. What's our next one? Dill is our next plant. And the next 3 that we're going to look at, dill, parsley and coriander, are all in the carrot family. So they've all got this wonderful umbrella for umbrella shape. They're in the umbrella for family. And you can see the number of flowers on top of that. It's a slightly blurry photo, but you can just see there's on that one flower stem, there's probably 1,000 flowers. So you can see how that's going to be beneficial to pollinators. And you need to know that you've grown those three plants, so the coriander, the dill, and the parsley. You need to know that you've grown them because the, in those three, the leaf, the flower, and the seed are all edible. But in the carrot family, you don't generally mess with the carrot family. So you need to be certain that you're eating those three plants, and there are probably some others, but those three are fennel is another example in the carrot family that you can eat, but some carrot family you really can't eat. So don't go wandering around in fields going, oh, this looks like dill, I'm going to eat it. Please make sure that you are certain that it's dill and that you know it's fine, and then you can eat the flowers and you can eat the seeds. And with all of these plants, they're all of these seeds, they're all really easy to sow. Sowing them now, they're all good ones to sow now. And you can be eating them within 6 to 8 weeks. And then if you leave them longer, you can get a bit more. I'm mindful of time, so I am just going to go through these two. I think that's a parsley. I think that's a Hamburg parsley because I struggle to find any other photos of flowering parsley because it's not typical to leave it to flower. It's once you've had parsley and you've let it flower and set seed, you've probably got it for life. So I left some at the end of my garden or in at the side of my vegetable patch last year, and I've now got all the parsley I could ever possibly need. And it'll be there for about another month before I need to clear it for space, and that's perfect timing for it to flower. So it's a nice early flower, but it's not typical for people to do that because they clear their beds and they think I'm going to put my next thing in. So just leaving things a little bit longer can often be beneficial. This is a coriander, I think. I don't like to grow coriander because I'm one of these people that it tastes like soap. My husband likes it, so I do try and grow it for him sometimes, and I don't mind if it grows and it flowers like this, but I'm not going to put too much effort into it because I don't really like to eat it. It's one of the main rules of growing food. You grow the food that you like to eat. And what do I want to say about coriander? It can be slow to germinate, so don't be in a rush if you think your seeds haven't germinated. And dill, parsley, and coriander all prefer to be sown in situ because they have quite a long taproot. Like if you think like a parsnip or a carrot, they have this long taproot that goes into the ground. And if you get to the point where it's a bit too long, it can be hard to transplant that. So you can either sow them in modules and try and transplant them out relatively quickly, or do them straight into the ground. And if you just wait a few weeks, maybe wait into May, then the ground things will be warm enough for you to be able to sow those seeds directly. And they all grow to be about 40-50 centimeters. So if you want to try and do something indoors, I would recommend doing basil indoors. The others will probably all prefer to be outside. This is my little bit about pests and how to deal with them, but I might actually just try and go through the next few slides and then I'll come back to this because I can see that there's probably also a few questions, but yeah, maybe I could share some information on how to deal with pests, or if anyone has any particular questions, we can look at them. But there are a few other things you can do. So I've just wanted to focus on those three areas that are quite beneficial to pollinators, but there are others, obviously. Anything that flowers is great. And tomatoes and peppers, it's too late to sow them, but it's not too late to grow them. So either get some from a friend or go to a nursery or go to a plant sale and try some tomatoes. Peppers generally need to be under cover in a greenhouse or a polytunnel, so they need a bit of heat. A huge range of perennial herbs. So this is a mint, I think, a flowering mint, and a chive. If you don't have a lot of time for gardening, but you want to have some edible pollinator attractors, herbs are a really good one to introduce into your garden. And of course, fruit. So I can just about see, it's just starting to get dark, but I can just about see one of the apple trees in my garden, and it is full of flowers. And when you walk underneath it, like with that squash flower, you can hear the tree buzzing, can't you? So having a fruit tree, if you've got space for a fruit tree, particularly an apple, but any fruit really is beneficial. Even blackberries, allowing blackberries to grow in your garden if you have some, strawberries, currant bushes, anything that fruits is covered with a wide range of flowers and is great for all wide range of pollinators. This is a bit of a busy chart, but I thought it was quite a good visualization of how a lot of the plants that we've talked about can be companions to other food in the garden. So you can see the dill at the top and the basil over on the right and the cilantro or coriander down in the left. And there are other companion plants that you can add into your garden that can serve to bring in pollinators or create some kind of compound chemical that will deter pests. So the togetes marigold are very good for that. And these little blue flowers of borage, these are a really good one to grow to bring in pollinators, and the borage is edible. Togetes marigold isn't edible, but the Calendula officinales marigold is, so that's another good one to grow. I don't think that's on this chart. Nasturtium, also great and also edible. Lots of flowers in the garden are, but do be mindful of that. Don't eat it if you're not certain. Rule that I mentioned earlier. So these are some places to buy some plants. We've got three really good nurseries. Finchley Nurseries is probably the one that most people will use if you're in Barnet. They're in Mill Hill rather than Finchley, but they're a nice family-run nursery. Clock House is over in Enfield, if you're that way, and Sunshine is down in Bounds Green. So I tend to, if I'm out in the car going somewhere, I tend to go to the nearest one wherever I'm en route to. I think they're all equally good quality of plants and pricing. I think they probably all could do better with their peat in their plants if they're not growing them all themselves and they're buying them in and selling them off. So if you wanted to remind them that we don't want peat in our pots, that would be a good thing to do. If you wanted to buy some stuff online, Rocket Gardens are really good for organic little plug plants, and they do a wide range of vegetables and salads and things like that. And they're organic. Herbal Haven is really good for herbs, obviously, and they do also do some salads. They often go to plant shows around the country, and they do come to the East Barnet Festival show, but we're not having that this year, unfortunately. But you might see them out and about, and they do a really wide range of different herbs. They're not organic, but they do grow environmentally minded, they say on their website. And then if you want fruit trees, there's a range of places that you can buy fruit trees and fruit bushes. But I've just got one example here of the Agroforestry Research Trust, which is Martin Crawford's website, who's the food forest garden guru. So he's got a wide range of interesting plants that you can get to grow in a variety of places. And then information overload, but this is going to be, we're all in the process of sharing all of this, but there's loads of local plant sales coming up, starting from now up until the end of May, and then there may be more after that, but April and May are really good times to get out and find your local plant sale and pick up a bargain and support a local project. And that is it, I think. I'm just going to... Oh, no, I was probably a bit soon there. I'll stop sharing while I've messed that up, then I can come back to your lovely faces. That was just my slide with how to contact me, but if you want to, I'm on all social medias, and Sherry has my contact details, so happy to answer anyone's questions. Because I realise I've said a lot and I've talked a lot and I've garbled a lot as well, so thank you for listening.
Wendy, that was absolutely fantastic and really inspiring. Thank you so much for also getting into the explanation and about the relationship between foods and pollinators and how important they are. And I think many of us are left with a renewed appetite, no pun intended, to learn more and get growing. And as you mentioned, you've created a food growing spaces map for Barnet. So that means it makes it really easy to find opportunities near everyone, So do take a look and make the most of what's on your doorstep. We will send links alongside the recording. I highly recommend you join Wendy's newsletter because she has a great way of finding local events as well, local plant sales, advice, and things like that. I think if Wendy is willing to give us maybe 5 minutes to questions. Wendy, there was a question about growing edamame here in
Mhm.
the UK. Is it possible?
It is. So it's the flageolet version of the soybean plant. I have tried it on a couple of occasions, but and it is perfectly possible. But what I found personally was that I probably wasn't observant enough. There's a very fine window between no bean in pod and hard drying bean in pod. So you've got to kind of when you get to the point of wanting to harvest to eat the soft green bean, you've got to probably look at your plant every day and just pick off a few pods at a time. So, and then they probably won't get it inside. They won't make it inside. They'll be eaten before you get there. But yes, very possible to grow. And if they did go too far and you weren't able to get them in time, you can grow your own soybeans and maybe try and make some soy milk.
Oh, sounds delicious. Um, are you able to give us 2 minutes about the slugs?
Slugs, yeah. There's no easy answer on slugs, and I was preparing myself for a slugmageddon this year because we've not had one for a while, and I think because we had quite a wet and warm winter. I thought we were going to have a really bad April, like we've had. It kind of alternates, doesn't it? But last year was a good, dry March and April, and touch wood, we've had the same so far this year. So I don't think we've had many slug problems, have we? Um, I don't have easy answers. I sow more to cover for the losses. I use barriers. So if I put a little plant out, I'll put an old plastic milk bottle or something on top. If you chop the bottom off and take the lid off, so there's ventilation, it just creates that little bit of a pause for the slug to find its way in there. And eventually it'll find its way in there. They're quite clever things. But if you just give it that barrier to slow it down a little bit, it might give chance for the roots to get down and the plant to get big enough. So the key with dealing with slugs is you've got to get the plant past the point where it's tasty enough for the slug to want to eat. And if there are more slugs, more things will be tasty. So that's what I was worried about this year, that we might not have had the cold winter to kill off the eggs and that we were just going to be inundated with them. So growing things in modules and then planting them out can help. So you've got a more hardy, healthy, bigger plant. I personally don't think anything like eggshells, ash, chili, all the different things that people say to sprinkle them around, they don't work. My biggest um, aside from the barriers, my biggest win, if it is such a thing, is to go out at night with a torch, pick them up, and move them into my compost bin. And then they have a nice little home in the compost bin. They're all there together and they make a nice, happy family. And people say, well, aren't they going to have more slugs? Um, but they're trapped within inside the compost bin. They've got stuff to eat with my weeds, and that's my compromise with the situation. But yes, it's
I
not an
think
easy one, is it?
it's a great compromise, especially if you're diligent and you're not too squeamish about removing them by hand with gloves, of course.
Yeah.
Sounds like a great solution to me. Last question. Is it too late, Wendy, to sow sweet potatoes, slips, and ginger?
I've not done sweet potatoes for a while. I think it's fine. Yeah, because they're a tender plant, so it's only too late to do anything really if it's like end of May, June. I am not 100% certain about how long their season is, but the one time that I did grow them, they need heat, so they need to be somewhere nice and warm. They need a cover. I did them in my polytunnel and they had all of those things. They had all the water, they had all the moisture, they had all the food, and then mice ate them at the end of the year. So I didn't have much luck with them, and that probably put me off trying again. Um, And I think I even made my own slips, but you can also buy little plug plants from places. So yeah, whoever asked the question, try them this year and let us all know how you got on, because I just obviously wasn't that lucky. What was the other one? Ginger. I've tried to grow ginger as a house plant, and it is very difficult to overwinter, even indoors. So it's not something I do anymore. I think, the things that are from countries that need a nice long season and need to live a longer period of time to generate the roots. If you're thinking about when you put the ginger root in, you can get a shoot, no problem. But to actually generate a crop to grow and eat, it's going to need quite a while in a pot to grow. And so if we don't have the season for it, or the long enough season for it, it can become harder. So it's just one thing that I found, for the amount of observation that I need, the amount of time and attention I needed to give it, it probably wasn't one for me to try. But again, whoever asked the question, please try and let us know.
Thank you so much for staying a few minutes and answering these questions for us. And I think we all look forward to meeting you in person during one of your sessions, or come to a seed swaps. These are usually in March, aren't they?
Yeah, the seed
In
swatches.
New
Yeah,
Barnet. So we will all have a chance to meet you if you want to. Thank you for giving so much of your time to help people of Barnet grow food. You are really are a fantastic advocate for food growing, and we really appreciate you. Thank you, Wendy.
thank you, everyone. Have a
And
good
thank you, everyone,
evening.
for joining.